conservation and activism and innovation and solution is a badge of honor nowadays. And I love the fact that we live in a time where we can identify a problem and there are people who are ready to jump into action. And that's what this next panel is about. We're going to address microfibers, and there's some really good dialogue and some interesting story that we're going to hear. And my friend Rachel Lincoln Sarnoff is going to be moderating this panel. She was with Five Gyres. That's where I met her. She has her own consulting firm right now, and she is committed to addressing this issue, and she's going to lead a really exciting panel on sustainability and the fashion industry. So please welcome Rachel Lincoln Sarnoff.
Thank you. Look at this, chivalry. So I think we're all going to come up. I have someone's notes here. So Tiana, you're going to like this. I don't know where you went, because we're going to talk more about plastic. Thank you for that introduction, Vipe, and thanks for putting this together. I missed this last year, but I'm just so excited to see how the Rising Tide Summit is evolving, and to see kind of where it's going to go. So I am joined on the stage today by Derek Sabori, who, is that how I pronounce your last name?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Correct, good.
Thank you.
Who is the co-founder of the Kozm men's yoga wear brand and founder of the Underswell Sustainability Consulting. Derek is the former vice president of global sustainability at Volcom and designed and teaches this amazing sustainability fashion certification course that he actually designed and created and now runs at Orange Coast College. And also Christian Cullinane.
Cullinane.
Okay, so Italian, but he's British. He's probably traveled the furthest to get here because he actually came from the UK to be with us today, which is amazing. He is the managing director of consumer brands at the UK-based Xeros technology group, which has developed technologies to reduce water consumption and filter plastic microfibers. He's also an executive coach with Preston Associates. So clearly we all know that we have a problem with plastic. So I'm just gonna, and forgive me, you guys probably know a lot of this, but I just thought that we thought that we could kind of start with a little bit of an overview of the problem. I don't know if there's my screen. Okay, so we know the statistic, right? The 2050 statistic. We also have all seen the poor turtle. And these are plastics that we all can see. But what we want to talk about today are plastics that we can't see, right? Microplastics. And very specifically, so microplastics, any plastic that measures less than 5 millimeters. And then specifically, we want to talk about not just the microplastics that macroplastics are degrading into, which is when you get, like a cup that's turning into tiny pieces of plastic, but specifically the subset of microplastics, which is plastic microfibers. You can say that 10 times fast, or I can try and we can all laugh at me. But basically what we know from research over the last several years is that washing just one, for example, microfiber fleece jacket can release as many as 250,000 plastic microfibers. And these microfibers are so small that we can't filter them in our waste treatment plants. And so we're releasing about 4.5 million each day that are basically going straight through, just like plastic microbeads, right? Same thing, going straight through filtration, going out into our waterways. And what we are capturing is it's ending up in our sludge that's going on our fields, and that's ending up in our food. So it's a serious problem. We're looking, these are the statistics annually. It's a small subset of the problem of plastic in the ocean, but because it's such a small, tiny piece of plastic, we're seeing it move up through the food chain. So when you're looking at the studies that are showing that 33% of shellfish, 70% of fish, 83% of drinking water, 94% of bottled water contain microplastics, much of what we're seeing are these plastic microfibers, So today we want to talk about, move away from those studies that some people will discount because they're saying, it's a study, it's showing very, very low levels of these plastic microfibers in our food, in our water. We really don't need to worry about those things. But as we all know, plastic potentially contains endocrine disruptors. Most plastics, endocrine disruptors have been linked to infertility. They've been linked to obesity, even cancer. So yes, we do need to look at these challenges, and we need to look at solutions. Today, 93% of Americans test positive for the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are found in plastic. So what we're moving into is a human health issue. We're moving from environment into human health. And I think that's where the gentlemen that are joining me today on the stage, we were talking about this earlier, we really all are looking at this problem, but from a different perspective. And I think what we represent here is kind of a microcosm of how we're looking at plastic pollution, the problem and solutions in general. We have industry, we have innovation. I'm kind of maybe the NGO perspective, but all of these three components to really create solutions have to be collaborating and communicating. And so I think that's what we are hoping to do today. So, beginning with you, Derek.
Okay.
We are, clearly we have a problem with plastic. We know this. Plastic microfibers from synthetic fabrics. But what do you think we can do, I guess, consumers and industry, to shift this trend?
Well, I guess, actually, I want to start. Anybody who out there is representing a brand? Is anybody else representing we had Reef here, a couple brand members. I mean, it's no secret. I mean, that's the biggest, for brands like in the action sports, Vulcan, for example, it's one of the biggest fiber, it's part of their mainstay of their fiber portfolio. So you've got cotton and polyester. So polyester drives everything. So I think the opportunities to move away from it are just sort of a systemic shift in perspective on how the customers engage with their product and what the brands are marketing to them and telling them that they need. So we have constantly, as brands, we've always told the consumer that you need high tech, you need stretch, you need four-way stretch, it's got to be water wicking, it's got to have repellent, and that's what you need in the water, right? Well, we've all, board shorts were cotton at one point, and brands will try to interject, and now we're mixing them with cotton, and we're using hemp. So there's an opportunity to start to shift away and offer, from the brand's perspective, show the customer that you can get away with products that aren't polyester or aren't synthetic fibers. But it's going to take both sides. It's going to take the consumer understanding and agreeing to go down that path as well. But cotton, obviously, is a great choice. Hemp is a great choice. These are all products that are available to us that we can use, we can interject. So much of this is about the brand just dictating the pace and saying, hey guys, it's a big issue going on in the world. We're aware of it. Here's what we're going to start doing. We're going to start offering more cotton or natural-based products in our line, and we urge you to go try them out, right? So whether it's cotton or it's hemp or just more things that are a little more biodegradable, I think, and are going to help drive change through this process.
So just to jump on that a little bit, what about a brand that was told by its consumers, or maybe was telling to its consumers, that recyclability was paramount? And so they basically moved into recycled poly as the cornerstone of their sustainability platform, and they expanded on that and messaged to their consumers about that. Now we know about plastic microfibers.
Yeah.
What do they do? How do they pivot?
That's a great question, because so many of the brands are just saying, finally, okay, that's the solution. Then we'll move to recycled. We know recycled polyester has a smaller environmental footprint than virgin polyester, so that's a great thing. So right when you feel like, hey, we are reducing our overall impact, along comes a story of like, yeah, but you're killing the planet and you're killing people at the same time. So polyester clearly is not the solution, but it is being touted as one of the lowest environmental footprint fibers that we can use. So it's how they can pivot is just, I think, making the commitment. Just like the earliest panel, it's like if brands commit to be a defender of the Pacific, or we commit to saying, hey, we do not want to be associated with that. It's happening in the food movement. It's happening with the plastics movement. Just like with the ranch, saying we just won't offer those products anymore. That's a huge, bold step, and I don't expect brands to do that overnight. but I think we have to start moving in that direction until solutions start coming up. The research is done, and everybody can. There are ways for us to address this. We just have to, gradually start moving, and it takes brands years to make movement.
Mm-hmm. And I think something we've always talked about in sustainability, right, is vote with your wallets, right? Consumers vote with our wallets. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering now, and maybe Christian, you can approach this, but I'm just thinking about the excessive consumption, especially in America. We're spending $60 a month on average on clothes. We're sending 6 pounds of textile waste into the landfill a month on clothes. It's just like these crazy numbers, crazy quantities, and it's discouraging. But I'm wondering, what are you seeing in Europe? Are you seeing a similar kind of pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the unfortunate things when you're part of a geographical bloc like Europe, quite often the UK compares itself to the rest of the performance in Europe, and guess what? We are leading the way in buying clothes every single month by some margin. So people in the UK buy more fast fashion than anybody else in Europe per person. That fast fashion goes somewhere pretty quickly, and part of that is very clearly causing a number of issues and a number of concern. And one of the sort of slightly unique things that we've seen is that government is beginning to feel like it needs to take a role in this. There's very recently we've had an environmental audit committee in the House of Commons, our Parliament, to look at the very issue of fast fashion and the sustainability of fast fashion, and has made a number of recommendations. But very clearly, some of the issue here is that they've identified that, there's a number of technical solutions and there are other things that can be done, but actually all of these are addressing an enormous problem. Synthetic clothes are not going to go away overnight. We have a rising global population. Other textiles aren't necessarily that much better in terms of environment anyway. And this is driving a pace of change that requires some pretty rapid and pretty decisive intervention by the industry, by consumers, and by government. Is it worth talking about the EAC recommendations?
I think that's really important. So I think it's interesting, not only just for fashion, and you can go into some of those recommendations, but just the idea that fashion as an industry, that is potential regulation includes extended producer responsibility, which then again applies to other industries where plastic is a problem. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the EAC spoke to a whole bunch of stakeholders within the industry, including us as a sustainable business, and looked at a number of issues and made a number of recommendations. And some of those are potentially fairly blunt instruments. So we're talking about taxation, tax measures in terms of incentives, so encouraging people to reuse clothing or repair clothing, so you can give tax incentives for people, those types of businesses, to make them more competitive and more sustainable, as well as tax measures that could pay for recycling capability within the country. So these could make a notable difference. It sounds very easy to say, well, we'll simply put 1 pence on every garment sold, and that will pay for all of the recycling we could ever want. And that sounds like a beautifully simple, elegant, if you're sitting in the House of Parliament, you can write something and all of a sudden everything will be fine, type of measure. The actual implementation of that requires people to work together. It requires industry to be working with interested parties, either NGOs or other parties, in order to be able to make that happen. I was talking to a leader in this, an NGO in the UK, who I won't name, but he did actually say that the easiest way of campaigning for an issue is if there's a European directive making the government do it. Boy, does that help. Where that doesn't exist, and one of the things that the EAC reports highlighted is that industry had been asked to self-govern on this issue, and industry had not provided an adequate answer, and therefore government was beginning to consider ways to make that decision, make that governance actually happen.
So Christian, you know, in the meantime, as we are potentially, or sorry, Derek, in the meantime, as we are potentially looking at legislation, you know, in Europe also, perhaps here, and then technology, which we'll get into in a minute, what can we as consumers do to reduce the amount of plastic microfibers we are sending into the world?
Yeah, I think just like you said, you vote with your dollar. So look for brands that are offering alternatives. I mean, that was one of the things that when I started our brand, when we started Kozm, we really wanted to make sure that we were kind of taking all the best practices that we knew and applying them into the real world space. So we wanted to make a performance short, for example. You know, typically your yoga short, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be polyester, it's going to be nylon, it's going to be stretch, it's going to have all these great features. We wanted a natural-based product, so we made ours with hemp and organic cotton. There's a little bit of lycra in there, but it's a lot less, and very little trims, no metals, no plastics on it. We just said, hey, this is all you need, and it's working in the marketplace. So consumers need to, I think, do a little research, go out there and maybe lower their expectations or change their perspective a little bit on things. I think that's the biggest thing we can do while we're waiting. There's just a lot of research that is going on right now. I don't know if we want to touch on that now or if we're getting there later. Sorry.
No, yeah, go for it.
Because I think from the brand's perspective, there's this waiting pattern for to happen because industry groups and universities are kind of scrambling to figure out what are the best testing methods. You know, we've got groups. The European Outdoor Group is working on a set of testing methods with Leeds University. Here in North America, UC Santa Barbara, the Bren School is working on their set of testing standards, and everybody's trying to understand what standards should be used, what type of lab settings. So it gives industry this opportunity to just say, well, we're waiting to see what fabrics are the worst, or we're waiting to see whose testing methods we should align with. And in those testing methods will still also dictate what the sheddability standards are, you know, right, or what the limits and the max are, and what fibers perform the worst, what knits and weaves and treatments, you know, might affect how things shed. So in the meanwhile, I think it is, while the brands sort of just hang tight to get their information that we need, I think it's up to the consumers now to play a really active role and come out and say, hey, then we're going to choose different, and we're going to look for products, and we're going to reward brands that are offering something different with a unique perspective that are, you know, addressing this problem.
And for those of us who have yoga pants made from plastic,
Yeah.
you know, hand washing, right?
Or don't wash them.
Or
if you dare.
Yeah.
I will say that is one of our tests even too with the hemp short, with our hemp and organic cotton short. I promise, we tell people it's like, do not wash it once when you get it, and we actually pre-wash it for you, but wash it if you need to, but then don't wash it. Like, see how many times you can go, because there are natural antimicrobial benefits that come along with hemp, right? And so it's just like, hang those things up, and I promise you, no matter how hard your yoga workout was, they'll be fine the next day, and they'll be fine the day after that, and the day after that. So I know with ours, like, you don't have to wash them. So we can get in this habit of, hey, maybe we don't need to wash our jeans for sure every single day, our work pants, you know, for men every single day. So
that's cool.
Yoga pants are different, maybe.
I'm gonna try that.
Try it.
Maybe. But also filters, right? There are aftermarket filters available that we can put on our washing machine so that we're not, so that we're basically filtering. And I think the technology that you guys are developing really makes that a lot easier, because we're not putting it on as, you know, as consumers aftermarket to our machines. It's actually something that then would be adopted by an OEM and put into a washing machine before you purchase it. So it would come with a filter, just like you have a dryer filter, you'd have a washing machine filter. So if you can share a little bit.
Yeah, as a company, Xeros Technology is actually a spin out from the University of Leeds. You know, we're working with the University of Leeds on the very program you mentioned. We're primarily a sustainability business that looks to reduce water use in industrial processes, including laundry, but also textile manufacture and leather tanning and a whole bunch of other processes. One of the things that we identified a couple of years ago was that we wanted to be very clearly aligned to the UN Charter on Water Conservation, and we aligned to that and challenged some of our engineers to come up with a solution specifically to deal with microfibers, because we recognised that this was going to be a growing issue. It was identified then, and you know, that growth has only accelerated over time. Yeah, there are a bunch of solutions on the market that look at microfiber filtration. We we believe that that should be something that's incorporated into a machine. We don't think that should be passed on to the consumer as another thing they have to buy. But it's very clearly needs to make a difference. And one of the things that we've identified is a filter that's in the machine that you can use multiple times before you have to then empty that filter out. The filter actually, I've got a little mock-up of it here actually, it's a tiny thing, and it's got a filter in it that basically you take this out. Never do a demonstration on stage. You take it out, and actually all of the microplastics that were in that wash, or several washes, are then captured in this, and you can empty it into the bin. You don't run it under the tap. You empty it into the bin, and in fact, the way that we've designed this, it actually dries it when you do that. Now, ideally, you would empty it into some kind of recycling capability. We're not quite there yet, but at some point, with luck, we will have a solution to that as well. But for now, this is a way of being able to address this issue very clearly, very quickly, very efficiently. And we're seeing 99% filtration rates on this. And I think one of the things that we've been very, very keen to do is to engage with OEMs. And I love the comment this morning that Mike made about it's really important for brands to take a side and to be very clearly seen to be on one side of this argument or the other. We've interacted with a whole bunch of washing machine manufacturers primarily because they're our target group that we would like to incorporate this technology. Some of those companies, they get it. You have a conversation with them, they understand what this is about, and they get it straight away. There are others who nod and go, that's very interesting, and then we'll consider it amongst the 40 other technological innovations that we've been approached with at any given point. So at some point, these brands need to take a side and need to decide that they're going to implement something that they can fix, without it suddenly being just down to the consumer to find another way of dealing with it. And it'd be great when more of those brands come on side. We're having great dialogue with a number at the moment. We've already signed some arrangements with some OEMs, manufacturers, and we're on the cusp of signing some others that will become public in due course. But as a technology, as a solution, it can really make a difference. And I think one of the things we were talking about outside was, there's no one answer to this. I'm certainly not going to propose that our technology will solve this problem, because it won't. What it does is, if you consider that about 35% of primary microplastics going into the sea are coming from laundry, this is something that you can make a difference on actually very quickly, while we consider all of the other solutions that are out there. And that is better textiles, that's better recycling, that's perhaps consumers changing certain buying decisions. There's a whole bunch of things that, on an iterative basis, we can get around to addressing this problem. We have one part of it, and we believe we've developed this technology and spent time and energy doing it, that we can fix an aspect of this very quickly, very efficiently, and it's the responsibility of a whole bunch of people to be able to make that happen. But we're certainly doing our part to try and advocate that within industry, and in the UK, in Europe and the UK, there's certainly very considerable growing interest on legislation being put in place. I mentioned the UK, there's similar proposed legislation in the Netherlands. The European Union are looking at putting in place directives that would address this very issue as well. So from a legislative point of view, compulsion is definitely on the agenda. And from a consumer's point of view, I think it's a necessity that we fix this and fix this quickly.
And there is legislation in California that's being proposed. It's study legislation, but there's a potential to include some time limit of adopting filtration. So I'm going to just... thank you. I'm just going to deviate for a second. I just want to ask you all a question. So raise your hand if you clean your dryer filter before you do a load of drying laundry, right? Like how many of you? Okay. I feel like that's 99%, right? So in a recent hearing, my understanding from Alexander, actually, who was there, is that the washing machine lobbyist said, we will never, ever, ever support this type of legislation in California because no one empties their dryer sheets. No one cleans their dryer sheets, and they're certainly not going to clean out their filter for their washing machine. So interestingly, in the UK, they did a really great marketing analysis, a market study, research study of consumer behaviors and how, what consumers think about plastic microfibers and what they can do about them. And clearly, they were, all in favor of this type of technology, this type of technological evolution, however small. So I think what we can see from, that comment with the lobbyist is, there's sort of a desire not to shift. And I want to just ask you one more question about the filtration. So if I were making washing machines and someone told me I needed to do this, I would immediately ask, what does it cost? So what kind of financial impact is that on a manufacturer to include technology like what Xeros has developed?
It's minimal. I'm not going to give you a specific number, but realistically, it's a rounding error. So it's a small cost to be able to address a very significant issue. Granted, these are all commercial businesses, so they all have commercial drivers. They all need to turn a profit. They all have shareholders. We understand and accept all of that. But if you think that a number of manufacturers have implemented technology changes within their machines, that on a good day you might ask about what the value of those actually are. I won't call out any specifics, but there's one particular favourite of mine that I've as yet never worked out, and everybody I've spoken to cannot tell me whether they've ever actually used this piece of technology. But it's effectively a drawer.
What is that?
Which solutions and innovations come in the washing machines all the time. This is a very, very cost-effective way of doing that. So quoting the argument that nobody will ever use it, or it's going to be too expensive, or they're not valid arguments. An interesting output from and I smile because of the comment, an interesting output from the EAC committee, and excuse me if I quote it, the government should facilitate collaboration between fashion retailers, water companies and washing machine manufacturers to take a lead on solving the problem of microfiber pollution. I 100% endorse the sentiment of that. I also recognise the reality, which is, and I think the lobbyist that you mentioned perhaps demonstrates this behaviour quite nicely, is that you can have that bunch of people together, all of whom will very, very effectively point the finger at each other and say, it's your responsibility to fix this. Missing the point that it's everybody's responsibility to fix it. So the washing machine manufacturers have a part to play, the textile manufacturers have a part to play, the retailers have a part to play. And I love the comment from, there was a great question asked of Kurt this morning from the Raj about his supply chain and making the supply chain follow their ethos and their understanding, and he described it as complicated. That is absolutely true, and at this point, the EAC's response has been to say to retailers, you are the closest to the consumer, so you will use your supply chain people to work with everybody else to fix this problem, which is the nicest possible way of passing the buck in reality. They basically said, you guys fix it. Thanks very much. Call us if you need us. So that's simply on its own not going to work. There needs to be a number of steps, and it's been interesting since that report's come out. Our engagement with retailers as a company has actually gone up quite significantly because I think they can see this is coming. But you do need that leadership from the legislative point of view, addressing this as a recognisable issue and something that needs to be done something about, and also a bunch of solutions and willing partners to actually make it happen.
So I think we have a consensus, right, that filtration is part of a solution. It's a yes and situation. So Derek, maybe you can kind of close this out before questions and give us some of those ands that need to augment, that need to support, support the movement towards filtration.
Well, I think you laid it out nicely that all of us play the role, and I think bringing in the consumer as well is a big part. So it is, getting brands to have awareness. I think once brands kind of acknowledge and admit that, hey, the products we are making are emitting plastic fibers into the environment that go into our food, that we eat, et cetera. So acknowledging that there's a problem. Every part of that supply chain, which is very complex and it's global and it's sophisticated and it's moving so quickly in the fashion industry, but it's like mills need to play a role. The dyers need to play a role. The manufacturing facilities, the cutting and sewing people need to play a role. The brands themselves need to play a role. Marketing needs to play a role. Consumers need to play a role. And then, down to the washing machines as well. So I think it's just coordinating every effort and getting some legislation that can help lean, because very few brands, synthetics are such an important part of the portfolio right now for brands, that very few are going to be willing to say, you know what, we'll move away from that. We'll be the first, count us in. I mean, even brands like Patagonia are saying, hey, it's a huge issue. Here's all the things we're doing. We're supporting, we're doing this, but you can still get all those products on the site. And that is not a blame on them. Every brand, I don't know of anybody who has left yet and said, okay, we're out, count us out. There's a huge issue, so we'll step aside. Everybody's just all in still, hoping that the thing works itself out.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's going to anytime soon.
And those projections show, right, that we're just moving up in terms of the use in synthetics. I think it's 70% by 2030 of all fabrics will be made from plastic, essentially. So we do have to figure out how to get ahead of it. So questions? Yes?
Follow up on that, Derek. So is the problem that Patagonia can't figure out what's a better material? Because I know as outdoor enthusiasts, like a lot of us are, cotton kills. That's what I learned when I first started backpacking. So you don't want cotton out there. It takes a long time to dry and warm. So I live in Patagonia here.
Yeah.
I feel awful, actually, after this panel.
Don't feel awful.
But I'm not going to go on backpacking trip with cotton. So what's my alternative? Is there anything out there right now that can cut the mustard?
Well, there is, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but there is a cotton manufacturer who's doing this crazy tight weave where they've said, hey, we can emulate the performance of your synthetic fibers with a natural-based fiber. It's a cotton program, so it's durable, it does what it needs to, it wicks, and then they can put a responsible DWR coating on it so it can perform, but it's more expensive as well. So right now, those synthetics nobody wants to disrupt their supply chain. That's the last thing anybody wants to do. So there are not a lot of, because even the brands that are doing the most in sustainable fashion and being the most responsible, it's just what they're offering. That's just what's on offer, because they're thinking, well, hey, that's what my consumers think they need, so we can't sell them something they don't want, or that there's not going to be a demand, right?
I think there's another point to that as well, in that, synthetic clothes aren't going to go away. They are performance wear. I go climbing and all of that stuff, and happily wear synthetic clothes to do it, because I don't want to die. However, there's no need to buy a new jacket every year, and some companies will repair outdoor equipment and do it in a very competitive fashion, do it really quickly, have a great service. There's a couple in the UK I can think of who you'll send it to them, they'll fix it, you'll come back, you'll have no idea that actually it's been repaired. Personally, I quite like seeing that some of these things are being repaired, because it makes me look a bit more hardcore. But that sort of stuff, that works. Where there's a tempo coming from brands sometimes, where actually you have to replace things on a regular basis, and I can think of football shirts is a great example. You think how many often football clubs change their shirt and they have 4 different outfits, and they do all of that just drives buyer behaviour, and perhaps there's an adjustment that could be made to, but at a commercial cost.
It's a great point, because even with all the talk about circularity and that being the holy grail of like, oh, well, we'll solve everything with circularity, just take all the products we have and recycle them and use them again, that fixes everything, right? But it doesn't, because we haven't addressed this idea of overconsumption, and that we are in the habit of needing the next jacket because Vulcan put out a new color or Burton put out a new technology. And Ryan, thanks a lot for ruining my surfboard, purchasing career, because once you buy your eco boards, you get 2 or 3, you get a nice quiver. You don't buy them again for years, So it's but it's that point of buy good quality product, and that will just stick with it and be okay with that jacket that you've had for the last few seasons.
Very quick follow-up to that. If I've had the same fleece for 10 years, are there less microfibers that are going out in the wash?
Yeah, they're already in the environment. You already did it.
I don't know, that's not true, because it does break down, so you're continuing to, so, but I don't want anyone to walk away from this panel feeling discouraged, right? We want to empower, and so I think, those simple tips: wash less, hand wash if you can,
delicate detergent.
If you're buying a washing machine, a front loader instead of a top loader for now is better. And then aftermarket filters. So there's a filter made in the US called the Wexco, called the Filtrol, made by a company called Wexco. You can get it on Amazon for $100. Put it on your washing machine. it's basically the same similar technology to this, meaning you empty it yourself into the trash, but it's aftermarket, so you're putting it onto an existing machine that's in your house. Those are all things that we can all do today to basically stop shedding from our washing machines.
And then send a note to your brand, your favorite brand, and just say, hey, I'm aware of this now. Thanks for doing what you're doing, if they are doing something. But I just want to let you know I'm aware what's on the horizon. What else are you offering for us?
Yeah,
It's good.
definitely. Yes, Jackie.
Well, I don't know if you guys are aware that shampoo is technically.
Well, bamboo is typically rayon, right? So it just turns into rayon. And so they're there too, but a lot of brands are using viscose and rayon now as well. And then you've got deforestation that is associated with that as well. So most brands are just realizing that if they don't have a good grasp of where their supply chain comes from. I guess my point being, and wool ranks really high on the environmental impact sector for the database information that we have for fibers. So no matter what road you go down, it's all bad. And that's when people just go, wait, what? So it's really frustrating. So I don't know, it's always this, it depends, and well, let's look at the data and let's do some LCA and show us all the analysis. So hemp, is great. It can be good too. Depends where it comes from, how it's grown, if it's grown in the proper way. So. Yeah, it can be. It's getting better. And there are different ways to process rayon or viscose as well. So it's just a complicated thing. And I think that's when more and more brands are becoming aware. They're educating themselves, working deeper in their supply chain. We never had traceability and transparency in the supply chain. When we started doing import manufacturing, you went to one agent who said, hey, we'll take care of everything from here. And the brand said, oh, this is great. This is easy. No questions asked. Now everybody's starting to ask questions and want to know and piece together everything. So it's awakening everybody again to, whoa. Okay, we need to start addressing all of these issues and chemicals and toxins. So,
yes.
Yeah, so to me, I'm listening to this debate, and obviously it's a really important question being part of this.
I think there's, to answer your question, there's this is an issue that's being looked at. There are studies underway in terms of waste treatment plants, water treatment plants addressing this issue. I would say if you have a water treatment plant in your county that's able to do that, then that's fantastic. That is genuinely a massive exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. Certainly the narrative around from many of the water companies has been that this is to fix the problem at the water company is a enormous industrial problem for them to fix, extremely costly for them to be able to fix, and not something that they can do really quickly. But you're absolutely right, and the piece about a holistic approach, addressing this in a whole bunch of ways in order to get iterative improvement is the way that we'll deal with it. We can suggest a few examples now. I very much hope, if this, in 2 years' time, there could be a panel who's talking about a whole bunch of other solutions to this problem and seeing progress. So we can talk about certain aspects of it, but there's certainly much more work to do.
I think this is the last question we have time.
Mine was just simply the realistic opportunity for California to lead. And do you think that it's realistic for the OEMs that California have an actual date by which we require microfiber filters in washing machines?
I think it's realistic and necessary. We've had an example in terms of self-regulation. So we ask industry to be able to come up with a solution to this problem, and you'll see an element of behaviour. The thing that will drive behaviour in a timely fashion, and recognising this is an issue that since we started this panel has got worse, and will continue to get worse even during coffee. It needs regulation to be able to really drive it in a timely fashion, and one might argue it is the responsibility of legislators to do that if they've identified a problem. Now, if they don't believe the problem, that's a whole different issue.
What are the pushbacks between here and getting these into the Home Depots of this world to actually see those on the floor there? When would that happen?
Yeah, I think there's, I've been interacting with a whole bunch of manufacturers over a period of time. You get, there's a big difference between academic acknowledgement of the issue and actually recognising it as a real issue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. There's technological considerations as well. All of these organisations are very process orientated. I won't say who the company is, but there's a European manufacturer of washing machines that changed the clip on the back of a washing machine. Front-loading washing machine, there's a clip on the back that you put the hose onto. It took them 10 years to change that when they decided to change it, because they have a rigorous and very, very thorough engineering process that has produced excellent products for decades, and they will not step outside of that position. The thing that would make them step outside of it is if the government turned around and said, you have to do this. Because all of a sudden, as an improvement, that goes right to the top of the list because they've got to, because the law says so. So I think there's, to answer the question, could it be done quickly? Yes, it could. Is there a necessity to do it quickly? Yes, there is. And it would be a sign of real leadership from California, not just in the United States, but worldwide, to do this.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys all for listening.
Thank you so much, Rachel, Christian, and Derek. Appreciate it. I mean, obviously, look, there are no shortage of issues facing our oceans, but what I think there is an infinite possibility for innovation and solutions, and I think this conversation is going to continue to develop. One thing that I kind of took away, Christian, is that, the microfibers can be captured in the little container. Ryan, I'm thinking, I don't know, if there's a way to capture some of those microfibers and maybe put them into fins or other items or something, maybe you can kind of, I think there's some connection there. So, well, thank you so much. Appreciate that.